This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining this week's NC Spin. We hope your holiday was safe, warm, and happy. Before we say goodbye to the year 2019, we want to review the big stories we talked about this year and get our panel's last word on them. Plus, we're going to name the NC Spin TarHeel of the Year, and since it's the last year in a decade, we're going to name the NC Spin TarHeel of the Decade. So we've got lots to talk about. Let's introduce this week's panel. They include Joe Mavretic, former House Speaker, Chris Fitzsimon, Director of the NewsRoom, John Hood, Syndicated columnist and author, and Becki Gray, Vice President of the John Locke Foundation. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get started. Throughout the 21 years of NC Spin, the last year of the show is where we take one last look back at the year that's just about to expire. So we want our panelists to give that one final observation on the top issues of the year. The first one I want to talk about is the theme of the year. If you had to give this year a theme, what would it be, Joe Mavretic?
Thanks to the Kingston Trio. There's genocide in Syria, there's riots in Spain, there's a hurricane in Ocracoke, California needs rain. The whole world is suffering with unhappy souls. The French hate the Germans hate the Poles, the Italians hate the Yugoslavs, the Swahili hate the Dutch. And
we don't like anybody very much.
And Donald Trump doesn't like anybody very much. So impeachment is the third year of this saga, and 2019 is the year.
Anyone else got a different theme for this?
But I think,
Well, I'm sorry. You told me you had 20 seconds on this, and that was about 30. What's the final theme? Quickly.
Hate and discontent.
Okay. Anybody else got a thing?
I think in North Carolina we saw a lot of activity. I mean, if you look back over just the NC Spin episodes over the year, there was a lot to talk about constantly, but here we are at the end of the year and really not much got done.
When the legislature convened the early part of 2019, little did they know it was going to be the third longest session in legislative history. I want to hit some of the high spots there. John, can anybody remember when we didn't pass a budget?
Not at all, no. I mean, sometimes budgets took a long time, sometimes sessions drug on. I don't believe this has a clear precedent. Now, arguably, we have passed versions of a budget because some parts of it have been funded in separate pieces of legislation that have been signed into law or let go into law. And we passed a law some years ago that allows the state government to continue at previous year's level. So this is not a government shutdown story, but it definitely is a no budget year, the first time I'm aware of.
One interesting theme I saw out of this legislative session is the legislature seemed to want to decentralize government, and they moved the Department of Motor Vehicles to Rocky Mount. They're proposing to move the Department of Health and Human Services into Butner, up in that county. Is this a trend?
Well, it's a trend. It's happening in other states. The Trump administration is trying to move the Department of Interior's main office. So this is a thing the Republicans are doing. I think one of the themes of this year, too, that strike me, one is not a secret, is the battle between the executive branch and the legislative branch, not just in ideology, but in power. It's happening in Washington, too. I think the second one is I think that the Republicans who have been in control of North Carolina state government, with the exception of the governor's office, since 2011, sense a change coming on. I think everybody does. You're seeing prominent Republicans leave, seek other jobs, and part of that is because the districts have been redrawn in a way that make it not certainly for certain at all, but make it likely that the Democrats are going to have more say in state government.
But Becki, Joe is on to something here. I mean, this was a year the legislature and the governor fought with each other. The courts got involved in disputes between the legislature. The state superintendent, the Board of Education didn't get along with each other. Dale Falwell and the hospitals were in arguments with each other.
And this is what you have when you have divided government. You know, this is something new for North Carolina. A lot of other states have this, where the division, the party division, separates and changes pretty frequently. This is unique for North Carolina. We had 140 years under strong Democrat leadership. The last 10 have been under strong Republican leadership. This year, there's been that division. What we've seen are the fights, but we've also seen what each party stands for and represents and which way they would take the state if things change with this next election.
Joe, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit is the prominence of the emerging prominence of the courts in North Carolina. They are more involved in issues. We started off this year, if you remember correctly, with Chief Justice, Supreme Court Justice Mark Martin announcing his retirement. The governor appointed Sherry Beasley to take his position. Then all of a sudden we had elections for and selections for Supreme. We're at a 6-1 Democrat to Republican plurality on our Supreme Court. Is that something that we're going to see for the future, for foreseeable future?
Oh yeah, I don't think for the next 15 or 20 years, even with redistricting, that this rancor between conservatives and liberals, Democrats, Republicans, ever how you want to cut it, this is the norm not only for North Carolina or for the United States, it's the norm for the world. We are realigning throughout the world. It has repercussions all the way down to county levels. And what's happening in North Carolina is that we are having a government by the courts instead of the legislative branch. Absolutely.
Yeah. John, this didn't just happen so far as appellate courts were concerned. We saw a lot of rulings from superior courts this past year. I'm thinking particularly about redistricting rulings that took place, both congressionally as well as the legislative. So are the superior courts now becoming more prominent?
Well, all trials start in the trial court. And so any issue that might be resolved at the Supreme Court is going to start in the Superior Court in the case of these kinds of disputes that involve politics. I think that as Chris was getting at, we saw the legislative versus executive. We've already been seeing that. It accentuated in 2019. I do think the judicial branch, being part of this sort of constant struggle among the branches of government, it is sort of new in North Carolina. It's not entirely unheard of in a few cases, but now you've seen it in many different instances, and I think that is a new normal.
Chris, another one of the big stories in 2019 had to do with election fraud and elections in our state. The State Board of Elections conducted hearings, very lengthy hearings you might remember, over absentee ballots in the 9th Congressional District. These hearings were televised or streamed. Kim Strack was head of the State Board of Elections. They ended up in a situation in which Mark Harris, who had won presumably the election, stepped down, didn't run again. We had have special elections in the 9th. About that same time, Congressman Walter Jones died, and so we had to have special elections there this past year.
Right. Yeah, it was definitely a tumultuous year. It'll be interesting to see if the public confidence, I hope not, was shaken in our electoral process. I think we've had some wild rhetoric about that. There's still a lot of controversy about the voting machines. I don't think we're funding our local elections boards enough. I think we have a system. We either have to give the counties enough money or the state has to take it over and fund it itself. I am worried about the technology. Brad Crone, a frequent panelist on this show, is always talking about the touch screens and some of the software that's not even available anymore to be updated. We have a serious problem going forward, and I hope we don't allow that to allow people not to have confidence in our election process.
This got very political from the standpoint that we also had insurance election fraud this past year. Insurance Commissioner Mike Causey got involved. In fact, wore a wire, as I remember it, with potential bribes taken to throw decisions in the Department of Insurance. Also involved Robin Hayes, who was the former congressman, former legislator.
Pleaded guilty to a felony.
Pleaded guilty to a felony, was sentenced to that. We had involvement with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Pat Conway and controversy all over that. Wow. This is not something we normally see in North Carolina.
Well, it's not, but I think it's something, well, and Joe's going to, I think,
You
fill
just-
us in on some
Well, wait a
things in the
minute.
past. But I think that, I mean, what we've seen with this is more transparency, good government, good people stepping forward. Don't forget, I mean, Mike Causey's a Republican, and there are Republicans, the former chairman of the House, has been one of the casualties of this. But, sometimes you step forward and you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. In the Blue Cross Blue Shield situation, I think that could have been handled better. Transparency is always
But he
a good
stood up and
thing.
said, Pat Conway's got to go.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But you,
Come on now.
all right.
About every 4 or 5 years, somebody that's an elected official gets put in prison. So it's not anything
You're
new
thinking
in
of
North
paper
Carolina.
bags and IHOP and
All I'm
Salisbury.
thinking about is if you go back and look about every 4 or 5 years on this show, we've talked about some elected official that just went to prison.
Yeah. John, higher education was one of the top stories that we talked about during
Really?
2019.
I did not recall that.
Well, we started the year with the departure. Margaret Spellings, UNC President Margaret Spellings, left right at the beginning of the year. That was not the only big news of the year. We had Dr. Bill Roper come in and take it on an interim basis to be president. Carol Folt resigned over Silent Sam. We had Cecil Staten, who was fired down at East Carolina. Higher education, they weren't talking as much about education as they were about personalities this year.
Though there were also discussions and arguments and policies about the education that's happening on campuses too. There's a wide range of stories that we talked about or referred to on this show over 2019. I think the theme of this is the Board of Governors' relationship with the head of the system or the head of the chancellors of the main campuses. I think that's the big story. Towards the end of the year, with some people leaving the board, changing the chairmanship of the board, I think that's possible to see a glimmer of difference in 2020 in the relationship between the Board of Governors and the system. We'll just have to see how it works out.
Also, with all of this controversy and all the noise about these things that you mentioned, it's been completely overshadowed. A lot of the good things that the Board of Governors have done, that North Carolina Promise program, where 3 of our universities, the tuition is limited to $500 a semester. I mean, there are things that they have done that have really broadened the opportunities for higher education for students across North Carolina. That in this whole story, that's something that I've been sad hasn't been talked about enough.
Good point.
I think that for me, this is the first time that I've seen members of the Board of Governors use the board for a stepping stone to other businesses or other vocations. I've not seen that before.
I think the board has been a disaster. The way it's operated, we have board members hiring private people to investigate people. We have meetings that nobody knows that are happening. We have non-transparent things. We have conflicts of interest. We have all sorts of stuff. And ironically, the leadership of the General Assembly has sort of gotten off, I think, scot-free. They're the people who pick these people. That's who's responsible for who's on the Board of Governors.
There is some sense at year's end that Randy Ramsey, the new chairman of the Board of Governors, things are calming down a little bit.
I believe that's the intentional strategy.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that yet.
Yeah,
We'll
because
see. That might be
right at the end
plan,
of the
but
year,
it's not
their
happening
Silent
now.
Sam,
That's right.
their Silent Sam decision.
Yeah, well, don't be surprised because the General Assembly owns the university system. Not K-12, not community college, but the university system belongs to the legislative branch.
Yep, they're the ones that pull the strings as well as being the banker.
That's
right. Education, while we're on the subject, we spend about $8 billion a year on K-12 public education. One of the biggest expenditures and probably the most significant role for state government in North Carolina.
Consistently over the years, no matter who's in charge, we have always had education as a high
But
priority
again,
in our state.
the controversies sort of overshadowed some of the achievements, particularly I think about Read to Achieve, the relationship between Mark Johnson, the state superintendent, and the State Board of Education.
That to me, Tom, goes back to this question of whose job is it? And when the legislature passes laws, the intent and the assumption is that the administration is going to carry those out. I think the Read to Achieve is a really good example of how the General Assembly, with good intentions and a good plan, handed it off, and somebody's dropped the ball with that. And I think that's what we need to go back and look at, of, when these laws are passed, who's going to follow up and who's going to make sure that they're done and they're done right.
John, one of the things that came out of all of this is the NAEP scores, the testing scores, compared North Carolina to, and our scores showed that our students aren't necessarily achieving more. They're about where they were before.
They're close to where they were at the beginning of the 21st century. There was some bouncing around, but not a big trend. And we're about at the national average in most categories. We have spent a lot of money. We've done a lot of things. Conservatives have done things. Progressives have done things. We have to recognize just how difficult it is to change education in the short run. Some things are given up before they're given a chance to succeed. Other things are kept around long after it's obvious they didn't work.
We had a march on Raleigh from teachers during this year. It wasn't as big as the one that I think was held last year, so far as it goes. But teacher pay raise is still a big issue, and we end the year, and teachers still don't know what raise they're going to get.
Well, that's right, and a lot of the publicity about teacher pay raise will focus on the average amount. But a lot of teachers, some years they'll give raises to veteran teachers, some years to young teachers. It is undeniable that we're still spending less per capita than we did before the Great Recession, and we've cut teacher assistants, a lot of other things. I think that causes a lot of dissatisfaction in the classroom.
I think it's important to recognize in the budget that the governor vetoed, it included the consecutive 6th and 7th consecutive pay increase for teachers. I think that's something important to remember. I think it's also important to remember when we're talking about teacher pay increases and spending more money on education and how much we spend, what we really need to start looking at more and more is where's that money going? How is it being spent? What are the outcomes that we're getting from that? Let's do more of the stuff we're getting good opportunities and in the classroom, and let's stop spending money on things that we're not getting the outcomes we come to expect.
Tom, and we're organized for mediocrity. We keep doing the same things. John says we're almost at the national average. That's exactly right. We're the 10th biggest state in the country, and we're always just below the national average.
We used to thank God for Mississippi, you remember?
Exactly, and it's not going to change until we decide that we want to be better and then have a long-range plan to do it.
We ended the year with the Leandro report from a consultant saying we needed to spend more money, and it left so many question marks because...
Where did the money come from?
Where is it coming from?
Well, we cut taxes by $3.5–4 billion a year. That's one place it went.
Well, and the money part of the Leandro report, this is a report that was submitted in the Leandro case, and the money and the spending is getting all the attention. There also are a lot of suggestions for reforms in that report that the General Assembly has been considering and talking about for years. Things like more autonomy for principals, again, paying good teachers well to offer them the professional advancement that they can do while staying in the classroom, looking at the funding formula, again, where that money goes.
They also talk about that sort of A through F grading system, which I thought we all agreed on the show was terrible. They're apparently not listening to NC Spin. It's still in place.
Yeah, and they've still got the 15-point grading scale. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, well. Let's move to another topic, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Boy, we started talking about this early during the year. It's still hanging around. The Department of Environmental Quality, John, approved the application for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, but simultaneously we learned there was a $58 million mitigation fund attached with it. The governor had his list of projects that he wished the mitigation fund to be spent on. The legislature said, no way, Jose.
That's not quite. He didn't have any list. They had no idea. He refused to tell them how we would spend
no, but he told them generally where he wanted to put it. He wanted to put it in solar energy. He wanted to put it for...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One way or the other, this is still a controversial subject.
It's a big mess. I personally think that the governor, perhaps, certainly people around the governor know they messed this up very badly. They don't want to go any further than that and say there was anything truly wrong done, but they admit they messed it up. They should never have even given the appearance that they were withholding permits for a project until they got concessions from a regulated utility on unrelated matters. And they were unrelated. And they shouldn't have done that, and it's still a major political problem for Governor Cooper. It is one of the biggest mistakes he's made during his tenure, and I think we'll hear a lot about it in 2020.
Tom, here's the trick. Energy-intensive business, 40% of them require natural gas. Without natural gas, Eastern North Carolina is out of competition for 40% of any industry that thinks about relocating.
Let me hit real quick another topic, if I can. ICE and the enforcement that sheriffs, the law that the legislature passed, that the sheriffs must comply with ICE agents to detain undocumented immigrants. There was a court battle. The legislature lost on this. Where do we stand on it at year's end?
Well, we stand at the legislature lost, and that this,
So the sheriffs can do what they want.
Well, at this point, but you have to. There are, I think, a lot of people in good faith on both sides. There are a lot of people on bad faith who, however, I think are trying to use this as a way to scare people, including our lieutenant governor.
Interesting.
As a story in 2019, I think that whole thing was very interesting in that, usually we look at those sheriff's races as individual races. This really brought up the thing. We have Democrat sheriffs who are taking a particular position across the state. People care about public safety, and I think a lot of citizens across, they may not know all the ins and outs of this, but they're paying attention to it. It's public safety.
Yes,
and public safety
ran on that, though, in many cases.
Yeah,
exactly. They own it. Yeah, no, you're exactly right.
And that's why and people voted for them. So.
I want to move to the topic of the TarHeel of the year. On the last show of every year, we ask our panel to nominate a person. This year, we included that to ask our viewers and readers nominate a person they think has made the most significant and important contribution to the state during this current year. We've had a number of really great nominations for it, and let me run through the list of names of the people that we have had. One of them is not a person, by the way. One of them is a group, an aggregate group, the hemp farmers of North Carolina. But we've had Dale Falwell, the state treasurer, Mike Causey, the superintendent of commissioner of insurance, Patrick Woody with the Rural Center, Roy Cooper, obviously the governor. Had a nomination or two for Mac Brown, the head football coach at the University of North Carolina. Silent Sam was nominated as the person of the year, and Walt DeVries, who just recently passed away, who started the Institute of Political Leadership in North Carolina, and a lot of people who are in elected office. This has been a significant year. There's a lot of important names on this list. Any comments?
I think every one of them could be. That's a great list.
It is a great list.
I was one of the people who mentioned the hemp farmer, and the reason for that is all of the attention that we've gotten on what are we going to do about agriculture in North Carolina? What are we going to do about the tobacco farmers? Are we going to replace that as an industry? And it's not often that we get to kind of start a new industry with regulation, input from law enforcement and others. And for me, the hemp farming discussion really set the stage for what are we going to do about this very important industry in North Carolina.
And Chris, we've got several different categories of people here, but I think we all often revert back to political people on this show.
We are a political talk show.
Yeah, right? We are a political talk show, and so that's sort of where we end up.
Yeah, and I would argue, this is the first time the governor has had did not face a supermajority of Republicans, and I think that a lot of people are wondering how he's going to do that. I think if you're a progressive North Carolinian, you have to be happy with his performance. I would think he would be a strong contender. One name not on the list, I should have sent it in earlier. I don't know if it's a group or a person, but the folks who are whether it's Common Cause or Bob Phillips or those folks, they have dramatically changed our electoral landscape for the next year.
For redistricting.
North Carolina's elections will be, I think, much better regardless of who wins, because a lot of people got mad at him for going to court all the time. But we're going to have better districts.
Yeah, Bob's done a good job of that. As far as it goes, the two political names that sort of jump out here are Dale Falwell, who took on the hospitals this year, John, and Mike Causey, the commissioner of insurance.
I interpret these kinds of questions as who had the biggest impact on our lives politically, and I think it's Mike Causey this year.
Well, we're also ending a decade, so we're going to name Mike Causey as our NC Spin TarHeel of the year. But we're also ending a decade. We asked the panel and others to name the person who they think made the most significant contribution during this decade. Fewer names, but some big names in this nominee group. Bishop William Barber, Phil Berger, President Pro Tem of the Senate, Ira David Wood, who is arguably North Carolina's showman, Hugh McCall, who has had a huge impact, particularly in the Charlotte area, and Court of Appeals Judge John Martin, who reorganized the court. Very quickly, I got a minute left here. Names, consensus?
If we're talking the single largest impact on North Carolina over the decade, I would have to say Phil Berger.
I think that you have to do that. Particularly,
but you could interpret the impact positively or negatively.
Positively or negatively.
And the irony is, we used to think it was a bad thing when one person had so much power for so long.
Yeah, that's right. I remember we railed about Mark Bass Knight first.
I still think that we should have more rotation.
Yeah.
But we've seen those transformational reforms beginning in 2011.
Well, you've heard our spin on the final word of 2019. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Next week, we're going to look ahead to 2020, a top economist and political scientist. Until then, Happy New Year, stay safe, and thanks for watching NC Spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.